The first cruiser arrived with its lights slicing through the soft, golden haze of the wedding reception, a silent, strobing intrusion that killed the music mid-chorus. The second and third pulled in behind it, tires crunching on the gravel driveway of our rented farmhouse. My new wife, Sarah, her hands still warm in mine from our first dance, froze. Her smile didn't fade so much as shatter. The 100-strong crowd of our friends and family fell into a dead silence, broken only by the idle pop of a distant sparkler and the low, ominous thrum of the patrol car engines. I saw her then, Patricia Vanderlin, HOA president. She stood off, to the side near the ancient oak that marked the property line, a silhouette of smug triumph against the setting sun. Her cell phone was still clutched in her hand like a weapon. She'd done this. She'd called the cops on my wedding day. A uniformed officer, his face all stern business, emerged from the lead car. The sequins on Sarah's dress glittered nervously as she gripped my arm tighter. My own dress uniform, the Marine Corps blues I'd chosen to be married in, suddenly felt like a costume. The officer's eyes scanned the confused, celebratory crowd, the linen-draped tables, the half-eaten barbecue, the string lights just beginning to glow against the violet sky, and his stern expression faltered. He looked past the whispering guests, past the terrified wedding planner, and his gaze landed squarely on me. On the uniform. His posture changed. The professional mask dissolved into something else entirely. Recognition, respect, shock. He didn't walk toward Patricia, who was already taking a victorious step forward to greet him. He walked toward me. And as he didn't reach for a ticket book or a pair of handcuffs. He stopped before me, snapped to attention, and brought his hand up in a sharp, perfect salute. "Staff Sergeant Evans," he said, his voice clear and carrying in the hushed air. "My apologies for the interruption, sir." Behind him, the other officers emerged from their vehicles. They took in the scene, the wedding arch, the cake, my uniform, the saluting officer. And one by one, they too straightened up and saluted. A line of blue, honoring a line of blue. The air, once thick with dread, now crackled with bewildered awe. Patricia Vanderlin's face was a frozen monument to catastrophic miscalculation. Her jaw was unhinged, her eyes wide with a confusion so profound it bordered on paralysis. She had dialed 911 expecting citations and shutdowns. She had summoned authority, and authority had come only to bow its head. This wasn't the plan. Her plan, meticulously crafted in the petty forges of homeowners association bylaws, had just spectacularly blown up in her face. But to understand the true depth of her defeat, you have to understand how it all began in the quiet, manicured hell of Whispering Pines. It started not with a bang, but with a violation notice. A single, crisp sheet of paper slid into our mailbox, 3 weeks after Sarah and I moved into the little ranch house on Cypress Lane. The smell of fresh paint and new beginnings still hung in the air. I'd just finished a 20-year stint with the Marines, and this quiet North Carolina neighborhood, with its symmetrical sidewalks and identical flower beds, seemed like paradise after a decade of sand and dust. A place of order, a place of peace. The notice informed me that the unapproved and non-conforming species of rosebush located in the front flower bed was in direct violation of Whispering Pines Covenant Conditions and Restrictions, Article 7, Section 4, Subsection B. It was to be removed and replaced with an approved, association-provided boxwood within 48 hours, or a fine of $50 per day would be levied. The rosebush was a Graham Thomas, a magnificent English rose the color of a summer sunset. Sarah's grandmother had propagated it from a cutting from her own garden back in Sussex. We'd driven it across state lines, a precious cargo of thorns and hope, and planted it together on our first day here. It was our roots, our anchor. "They can't be serious," Sarah said, her voice small, holding the notice like it was contaminated. "It's probably just a form letter. A mistake," I said, the optimist forged by 2 decades of dealing with military bureaucracy. "I'll go talk to them." The HOA board meeting was held in a sterile community room that smelled of lemon-scented bleach and stale coffee. Patricia Vanderlin held court from the head of a long laminate table. She was a woman in her late 60s, with a helmet of blonde hair that defied both gravity and logic, and a smile that didn't reach her cold, flinty eyes. She wore a crisp pink linen suit, and her hands, adorned with heavy rings, rested possessively on a thick binder labeled Whispering Pines CCRs. I waited through 20 minutes of discussions about mailbox paint sheen, eggshell was out, semi-gloss was in, and the egregious and repeated offense of a resident leaving their garbage cans at the curb 2 hours past the designated retrieval time. When it was my turn, I approached calmly. "Ma'am, about this notice? There must be a misunderstanding. It's my wife's grandmother's rose. It's not just any shrub." Patricia's smile was a thin, practiced line. "The CCRs are very clear, Mr. Evans. We have a specific aesthetic to maintain here. Property values depend on uniformity. That thing is a weed in a rose's clothing. It doesn't belong. With all due respect, it belongs to my family. It's important to us." Her eyes flickered over me, dismissing me. "Sentimentality is not a valid exemption. The rules are the rules. Remove it, or we will remove it for you and bill you for the service. Next." That was my first lesson in the law of Whispering Pines. Patricia's word was the law. The actual, printed CCRs were just her scripture, which she interpreted with the zealotry of a high priestess and the flexibility of a corrupt dictator. I didn't remove the rose. I paid the fines. It was a hill I was willing to die on, my first tiny act of defiance in a world of enforced conformity. The fines were a tax on our happiness, and I was willing to pay it. The escalation was slow, then sudden. A notice about our welcome mat being excessively floral. A warning that the faint patriotic bunting Sarah had put up for the 4th of July was political signage and prohibited outside of a 30-day election window. Then, the real weaponization began. I came home from a vet appointment to find the official notice taped to my door. A complaint had been filed. My dog, a gentle, aging Labrador retriever named Gunny, was deemed a nuisance animal for barking excessively between the hours of 2 and 2:15 p.m. the previous Tuesday. Gunny, who spent most of his days snoring on the porch, barely able to muster a bark for the mailman. "He was at the vet getting his shots on Tuesday," Sarah said, her voice trembling with a new, unfamiliar anger. "He wasn't even here." I stormed back to the HOA office. Patricia was watering the approved, association-provided petunias outside. "Mistakes happen, Mr. Evans," she said without looking at me. The complainant was quite certain. Perhaps it was another dog. "The point is, we have a process. You can appeal the fine at the next monthly meeting." I learned my first legal lesson that day, one I'd later weaponize. In many HOAs, the burden of proof for violation complaints often falls on the accused homeowner, not the accuser. The system is designed for accusation, not adjudication. They can fine you first and let you waste your time proving your innocence later. The next month was a montage of petty tyranny. A fine for grass measured at half an inch over regulation length after a week of rain made mowing impossible. A violation for unsightly accumulation of leaves in the gutter. Leaves that had fallen from the HOA-mandated oak trees they had planted. I started digging. Not with a shovel, but with a keyboard. My military training had been in logistics and intelligence analysis. I understood systems, patterns, chains of command. The Whispering Pines HOA was a system, and every system has a weakest point. I found it in the meeting minutes, buried in the online portal. A year ago, the board had voted to waive all landscaping CCRs for a property on Magnolia Drive. The reason listed was hardship. The property was owned by a Vanderlin trust. I cross-referenced it with the county tax assessor's site. The property on Magnolia Drive was Patricia's own house. Satellite imagery showed a wild, overgrown garden, a tangle of unapproved plants, and even a rusting swing set left by the previous owners. A clear violation of the outdoor storage rule. Her hardship? There was none. She had simply exempted herself from the very rules she weaponized against everyone else. I printed the evidence. I highlighted the bylaws. I was ready for the next meeting. This was no longer about a rosebush. This was about a corrupt fiefdom. But Patricia was a step ahead. She didn't wait for the meeting. The envelope arrived on thick, expensive stationery. It was from the HOA's law firm. It cited an obscure CCR clause about commercial enterprises and declared that our planned wedding reception, which we were hosting in our own backyard, constituted a large-scale commercial event because we had hired a caterer and a Banned. It was an absurd, naked abuse of power. It ordered us to cancel immediately or face maximum fines and immediate legal action. We couldn't cancel. We'd sold our previous home to afford this one. Every dime we had was tied up in this house and this wedding. Sarah was in tears. She can't do this, can she? I read the clause. The language was vague enough to be terrifying. Commercial enterprise was defined as any gathering with paid vendors that exceeded 25 people. Our guest list was 90. Patricia had written the ambiguity into the rules herself years ago, a landmine waiting for the right victim. She's betting we'll back down, I said, my voice low. She's betting we can't afford a lawyer to fight it. We were trapped. Our backyard, the place we'd dreamed of starting our life together, was now a legal battleground. The wedding was in 5 days. That's when I remembered the farmhouse. An old buddy from my unit, Mike, owned a sprawling property just 10 miles outside the Whispering Pines gate, but crucially, outside the HOA's jurisdiction. It was rustic, beautiful, and free from Patricia Vanderlin's reach. We moved the going reception. It was a logistical nightmare, a last-minute scramble that cost us more money and stress. But it was freedom. It was victory. Or so we thought. We believed we had escaped her. We were naive. On the day of the wedding, as Sarah walked down the aisle, toward me at the little country church, I saw a flash of silver outside the stained glass window. A car slowed, then stopped. I couldn't see the driver, but I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The feeling passed the moment I saw Sarah's face, radiant and smiling beneath her veil. I pushed the feeling down. Today was ours. The ceremony was perfect. The farmhouse reception was even better. The air was filled with the smell of slow-smoked pork and honeysuckle. Laughter echoed under the wide-open sky, a sound of pure, unregulated joy. Mike had strung up lights, and my Marine brothers, a band of brothers in their own dress uniforms, were already telling loudly exaggerated stories about my past misadventures. For a glorious hour, we forgot about Patricia Vanderlin. Then the cruisers arrived. The lights, the silence. As the first officer held his salute, the world snapped back into focus. The stunned silence of our guests broke into a wave of confused murmurs. Patricia finally found her legs and marched toward the officer, her pink suit a blot of outrage in the peaceful scene. Officer, finally. This rave is in direct violation of a cease and desist order. I want these people cited for disturbing the peace, illegal assembly, and the officer, still holding his salute to me, slowly turned his head toward her. He dropped his hand. His expression was no longer one of respect, but of cold, professional disdain. Ma'am, he interrupted, his voice cutting through her sputtering. We received a 911 call reporting and I quote, out-of-control drunken orgy with possible domestic terrorism links. He paused, letting the absurd, venomous lie hang in the air. Would you be the complainant? Patricia drew herself up, her righteousness a brittle shield. I am the HOA president of Whispering Pines. I am reporting a flagrant violation of this property, the officer said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous register, is outside Whispering Pines. It is outside your jurisdiction. More importantly, ma'am, you have falsely reported an emergency. You have wasted police resources. You have interrupted a wedding reception for a decorated United States Marine. He looked from her horrified face back to me, and his expression softened again. Staff Sergeant, my sincerest congratulations to you and your wife. My father served with the 1st Marines at Khe Sanh. He gestured to the other officers, who finally dropped their salutes. We'll see ourselves out. Enjoy your evening. As the police cars turned around and left, their lights now off, a new sound filled the void they left behind. It started as a slow clap from one of my old squad mates, then another, and then the entire crowd erupted into cheers, applause, and cathartic laughter. The band, seizing the moment, launched into an impossibly loud and joyous rendition of God Bless the USA. Sarah squeezed my hand, her tears now tears of relief and vindication. We had won the battle. We had humiliated our enemy on the field of her own choosing, but as I looked across the cheering crowd, I saw Patricia Vanderlin still standing there, alone under the oak tree. The applause wasn't for her. The victory wasn't hers. And in her eyes, the shock was rapidly cooling into something far more dangerous. Pure, unadulterated rage. She hadn't been defeated. She had been provoked. This wasn't the end. It was the end of the beginning. She turned and walked to her silver SUV, her posture rigid with fury. She had thrown her best punch, and I had not only absorbed it, I had used her own force to knock her onto the canvas. She had expected a fine. She had expected a shutdown. She had not expected a fight. And as her car disappeared down the dusty road, swallowed by the North Carolina night, I knew. The real war for our home, for our peace, was just about to begin. She would be back. And next time, she wouldn't be calling the cops. She'd be coming for everything. The applause that chased Patricia Vanderlin down the gravel road was a physical force. A wave of collective catharsis that seemed to shake the very leaves on the ancient oak. For a week, we rode that high. The story of the saluting cops and the humiliated HOA president became legend. Told and retold over backyard fences and in the checkout line at the local Piggly Wiggly. A tiny flag of defiance had been planted, and the whole neighborhood seemed to stand a little taller, breathing a little easier in the suddenly less oppressive air of whispering pines. Our mailbox, for 7 glorious days, remained empty of anything but coupons and a wedding card from a distant aunt. The silence from the HOA was deafening. We mistook it for surrender. We were wrong. We had confused a tactical retreat with a defeat. Patricia Vanderlin wasn't surrendering. She was reloading. The first shot of the real war wasn't a violation. Notice. It was a whisper. Sarah heard it first, at the grocery store. She was in the produce section, comparing watermelons, when she overheard 2 women a few feet away. Their voices were low, but carried in the chilled, vegetable-scented air. "Such a shame, after everything she's done for this community," one woman said, her cart filled with the same approved, generic brands everyone bought. "I heard he has episodes," the other replied, her tone dripping with faux concern. "From the war, you know, PTSD. It's why they targeted her. She was just trying to maintain standards and he just snapped. Called in favors with the police. It's all a bit scary, don't you think? Having someone like that on our street?" Sarah froze, the watermelon suddenly heavy in her hands. She turned, but the women, noticing her, offered tight, pitying smiles, and quickly wheeled their carts away, their whispers leaving a toxic trail in the misty aisle. The next day, a community-wide email blast went out from the HOA's official address. The subject line was benign. Community Safety Reminders. The body was a masterpiece of insinuation. It reminded residents to report any suspicious or erratic behavior to the board's anonymous tip line, and to secure their properties diligently. It mentioned, in passing, the importance of being mindful of our veterans and providing them with space and understanding, a line that sounded supportive but was carefully crafted to paint me as unstable, a walking liability. The smell of digital poison was everywhere. My service, the very thing that had earned me the cops' respect, was being twisted into a weapon. Patricia was no longer attacking our roses or our dog. She was attacking my honor, my sanity. The violation notices returned with a vengeance, but they were different now. They were no longer about petty infractions. They were structural, existential, and delivered with a new, chilling precision. One cited a non-compliant roof, claiming our 20-year-old shingles, which had passed a rigorous inspection just months prior, were now a hazard and needed full replacement with a specific, exorbitantly expensive contractor who just happened to be the brother of an HOA board member. Another arrived condemning our backyard deck, built by the previous owner and enjoyed for 15 years without issue. It was now, according to a suddenly produced engineering report, from a firm I couldn't find any record of, structurally unsound and an imminent collapse risk. We were ordered to tear it down immediately. Each notice came with a dizzying, impossible deadline and a fine structure designed to bankrupt us. The financial siege had begun. I learned that HOAs often have the power to place a lien on your property for unpaid fines, and in some states, they can even foreclose on your home for those debts. It's not just about nuisance fees. It's a legal mechanism that can cost you your entire investment, your very home. Patricia wasn't just trying to fine us into submission. She was trying to steal our house from under us. I couldn't fight this with mere defiance. I needed an army. I needed intelligence. I started holding secret meetings, not in our house but in Mike's barn, 10 miles away. The smell of hay and motor oil a stark contrast to Patricia's lemon-scented bleach. My neighbors came, one by one, under the cover of darkness, their faces etched with a shared, weary fear. There was Mr. Gable, a retired history teacher who'd been fined for having the wrong shade of white on his shutters. Maria and Lena, the young couple who'd had their pride flag torn down repeatedly for being unauthorized signage. Old Mr. Peterson, who lived on a fixed income and was being bled dry by fines for a cracked driveway he couldn't afford to repair. We were a resistance cell of the perpetually annoyed, the financially strangled, the quietly furious. We shared stories, documents, and a growing, cold rage. We weren't just a collection of grievances. We were a pattern. Patricia's corruption wasn't random. It was a system. And every system has a source code. My military intelligence training kicked in. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute. It was an op. Patricia was the high-value target. Her bylaws were her rules of engagement, and her financials were her center of gravity. I couldn't access HOA bank records, but I could follow the money through its footprints. I filed public records requests for all permits pulled by the HOA-approved contractors. I cross-referenced board meeting minutes with vendor contracts. I spent nights buried in the county clerk's website, the blue light of my laptop reflecting in my tired eyes. The only sound the hum of the server fan and the distant cry of a fox. And then, I found it, the motherlode. It was buried in a years-old budget approval form. A line item for perimeter landscaping and security enhancement, $85,000. The vendor was Green Thumb Sovereign Solutions. The name meant nothing. A deeper dig into state business filings revealed Green Thumb Sovereign Solutions was a shell corporation, registered to a P.O. box. The registered agent for that P.O. box was a lawyer. That lawyer's biggest client, according to the State Bar Association's published list, was the Vanderlin Family Trust. Patricia had paid $85,000 of HOA funds to a company she secretly owned for landscaping that was never done. It was embezzlement, plain and simple. I printed the evidence, my hands trembling not with fear, but with the fierce, clean thrill of a hunter who has finally cornered his prey. This was more than a loophole. This was a felony. This was checkmate, called my secret council of war. We met in the barn. I laid out the documents under the unforgiving glow of a single hanging work light. The mood was electric, hopeful for the first time. "This is it," Mr. Gable said, adjusting his glasses. "This is how we bring her down. We take this to the police. We call a special meeting of the entire HOA and present this." We planned our move for the following Tuesday. We would be calm, professional, and overwhelming. We had the proof. Justice, it seemed, was finally inevitable. We were so naive. The next morning, a certified letter arrived. It wasn't from the HOA. It was from the Office of Disability and Medical Review, a state agency. It was a formal notice of review regarding my veterans' disability benefits. The letter cited an anonymous complaint questioning the validity and severity of my service-connected injuries, suggesting I was capable of greater physical activity than I had claimed. The world dropped out from under me. It was one thing to fine me, to slander me, to threaten my home. This was different. This was touching the one thing that was sacrosanct. The compensation the government had given me for the peace of my body and mind I'd left in the desert. This was my livelihood, my health insurance, my family's security. Sarah read the letter, her face ashen. How can she do this?" she whispered, the paper rattling in her hand. "She can't," I said, my voice hollow. "But she can trigger a review. She can force me to prove it all over again. She can drag me through months of evaluations, hearings, and pure hell." The smell of the formal paper was a dry, bureaucratic dust that choked me. Patricia had somehow found my most vulnerable point. The one spot I hadn't even known was exposed, and she had driven a knife into it with surgical precision. She hadn't just escalated the war, she had changed the battlefield entirely. My service, my sacrifice, was now a liability to be audited. The doorbell rang. We looked at each other, a new raw fear between us. Had she sent someone already? Opened the door. It wasn't a process server. It was a woman I'd never seen before, in her late 50s, with kind, tired eyes and a nervous posture. She clutched a manila envelope to her chest. "Mr. Evans?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is Carol. Carol Higgins. I was the HOA treasurer before Patricia forced me out." I stared at her, too stunned to speak. "I heard what she's doing to you," she said, her eyes flicking down the street, paranoid. I couldn't stay quiet anymore, not after this. She thrust the envelope into my hands. It was thick, heavy. "It's all there. Everything, the real financials, the forged invoices, the kickbacks." She looked past me, her eyes landing on Sarah's terrified face, on the official letter still clutched in her hand. Carol's expression hardened with a grim resolve. "She's done this to others, people who left, people she broke. She's not just a bully, Mr. Evans. She's a cancer." She took a step back, already retreating into the shadows. "Use it. Stop her. For all of us." She turned and hurried away, disappearing around the corner before I could even thank her. I stood in the doorway, the weight of the envelope in my hands feeling like the weight of a whole community's hope. We had the proof. We had a witness. We had everything we needed to destroy Patricia Vanderlin's empire forever. But as I looked down at the disability review notice, a cold certainty settled in my gut. Patricia knew I had the financial evidence. This new attack on my benefits wasn't a separate skirmish. It was a diversion, a brutal, devastating distraction designed to pull me off my game, to consume my time, my energy, my sanity, while she consolidated her power. She had forced me into a terrible choice: fight to save my home and my community, or fight to save my family's financial survival. I closed the door, the envelope of salvation in one hand, the letter of destruction in the other. The high of discovering the embezzlement was gone, replaced by the chilling clarity of a soldier who realizes he's just stepped into a minefield. The battle wasn't over. It had just become a fight for my life on two fronts, and I had to choose which war to fight first. The clock was ticking. The community meeting was in 48 hours. The disability review process would take months. But the damage to my reputation, to my standing, was happening right now, in the whispers at the grocery store and the pitying looks from neighbors. I had the weapon to win, but using it might cost me everything I was fighting for. The manila envelope from Carol Higgins felt like a live grenade in my hands, its contents both the pin and the explosive. The disability review letter was the shrapnel, already in the air, aimed at the heart of my family's stability. 48 hours. That's all I had until the HOA meeting. 2 days to decide whether to save my home or my income. 2 days to plan a counteroffensive while under a psychological siege designed to break me. I didn't sleep. The smell of old paper and cheap ink from the copied financial records filled my small office, a stark contrast to the honeysuckle and barbecue of just weeks before. Sarah moved through the house like a ghost, the weight of the disability review a shroud around her. We didn't speak much. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like fear. My military training was the only thing that kept me from drowning in the panic. Assess, adapt, overcome. Patricia's attack on my benefits was a classic feint designed to draw my forces away from the main objective. I couldn't fall for it. I had to trust that the truth of my service would eventually win out against her lies. But I also couldn't ignore it. It was a ticking clock. So I split my forces. I spent the first day on the phone with Veterans Affairs, starting the arduous process of preemptively gathering my medical records, my commander's statements, the entire painful history of my injuries. Each call was a fresh battle with bureaucracy, a reminder of the war I'd already fought. It was draining, demoralizing work. In the stolen moments between holds and transfers, I prepared for the main event. I organized Carol's documents into a chronological narrative of theft. I highlighted the $85,000 payment to Green Thumb Sovereign Solutions. I linked it to the Vanderlin Trust. I found more. A $20,000 security consulting fee to another shell company that traced back to her nephew. A $15,000 overpayment for pool chemicals that was quietly refunded to a personal account. The total was well over $150,000. It wasn't just corruption. It was a career's worth of grand theft. I made copies. Dozens of them. I was no longer just a homeowner fighting a fine. I was a whistleblower preparing to bring down a regime. The night before the meeting, Mike and Mr. Gable came over. We sat at the kitchen table, the copies stacked between us like a fortress wall. We rehearsed it like a military operation. "I'll make the motion for a vote of no confidence," Mr. Gable said, his finger tracing the bylaws. "It's in Article 1. It requires a 2/3 majority of the membership present to remove a board member. And when she tries to shut you down, I'll raise a point of order," Mike added, his voice a low rumble. "We'll force a public vote. We'll make everyone in that room choose a side. And when they hesitate," I said, tapping the stack of evidence, "this will make them choose." We had a plan. It was a good plan. But plans have a way of disintegrating at first contact with the enemy. The community room was packed. The air was thick with the smell of nervous sweat, cheap perfume, and the same stale coffee that had haunted this place since my first visit. Every plastic chair was filled. People stood along the walls, their faces a mosaic of curiosity, anxiety, and open hostility. The whispers started the moment Sarah and I walked in, a hissing undercurrent beneath the fluorescent hum. Patricia sat at the head table, a queen holding court. She was dressed in a severe navy blue suit, her helmet of hair immovable. Her flinty eyes scanned the crowd, and when they landed on me, they didn't register anger, but a cool, contemptuous amusement. She knew about the disability letter. She was expecting me to be broken, distracted, defeated. She called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "We have a full agenda tonight, people, so let's maintain order." She launched into the minutes, the treasurer's report, a sanitized fiction that bore no resemblance to the documents in my bag, and a long, self-congratulatory monologue about property values. Then, she opened the floor for homeowner concerns. Her smile was a predator's grin. "I believe Mr. Evans has been quite vocal about a number of issues. Would you like to address the board?" Was a trap. She was giving me the rope to hang myself, expecting an emotional, unhinged rant about the disability review that would make me look exactly like the unstable veteran she'd painted me to be. I stood. I didn't walk to the homeowner's podium. I walked to the front of the room and turned to face my neighbors. I ignored Patricia completely. "My name is Ben Evans. Most of you know me. Some of you have listened to whispers about me." I let my gaze sweep over the crowd, meeting the eyes of the people I'd spoken to in the barn. "I'm not here tonight to talk about my grass, my roses, or my dog. I'm not even here to talk about the lies being spread about my military service." A murmur went through the crowd. Patricia's smile tightened. "I'm here to talk about your money," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying to the back of the room. "I'm here to talk about the $150,000 of it that has been stolen from you." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. "Stolen?" a man in the back shouted. "What are you talking about?" Patricia found her voice. "Mr. Evans, that is an outrageous and slanderous accusation. I will have you removed." "You'll have your chance to respond, Madam President," I said, cutting her off without even looking at her. I held up the first document. "This is a payment approval from the HOA operating account. $85,000 to Green Thumb Sovereign Solutions for perimeter landscaping that was never done." I turned and pointed to the window. "Show me the $85,000 worth of landscaping." I held up another sheet. "This is the business registration for Green Thumb Sovereign Solutions. The registered agent is a lawyer whose primary client is the Vanderlin Family Trust." I paused, letting the connection sink in. "The president of this HOA paid $85,000 of your money to a company she secretly owns." The room erupted. People were on their feet, yelling. Patricia was banging her gavel, her face flushed a deep, furious red. "This is nonsense! Forgeries! He's unstable!" I raised my voice over the din, a command voice honed on parade grounds. "There's more. A $20,000 security fee to a company owned by her nephew, a $15,000 overpayment that was funneled back to a personal account." I started handing out the copied packets to the people in the front row. "It's all here, every dollar, every lie." The packets were passed back through the crowd, a virus of truth infecting the room. People scanned the pages, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock to raw, incandescent anger. I delivered the final decisive blow. And according to our own bylaws, Article 4, Section 1, the membership, that's all of us, holds the ultimate power. We can vote to remove any board member for gross misconduct. We can vote to disband the entire board and hold new elections. We can even vote to dissolve the HOA itself if it's proven to be acting outside its fiduciary duty. The power was always ours. We just forgot we had it. Mr. Gable stood up. I move for a vote of no confidence in President Vanderlin and the entire board, he shouted. I second the motion, Mike boomed. Patricia was screaming now, a shrill, desperate sound. You can't do this! This is illegal! I'll sue each and every one of you! But it was too late. The tide had turned. The fear was gone, burned away by the heat of betrayal. A show of hands was called for. It wasn't even close. The vote, to remove her, was unanimous. The other board members, seeing the fury directed their way, resigned on the spot. Patricia Vanderlin didn't say another word. She gathered her expensive purse, her face a frozen mask of utter ruin, and walked out of the community room for the last time. The silence she left behind was different than before. It was the silence of a storm that has finally passed. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The new interim board, made up of me, Mr. Gable, and Maria, immediately hired a forensic accountant. The evidence was handed over to the district attorney. Patricia Vanderlin was arrested on charges of embezzlement and fraud in front of her perfectly manicured, non-compliant house. The disability review, once it became clear it was part of a pattern of malicious harassment, was dismissed with an apology from the agency. One sunny Saturday, a month later, we held a block party. Not a HOA-sanctioned event, but a real one. Music spilled from open garages. The smell of a dozen different kinds of grills filled the air. Mr. Peterson's cracked driveway was being repaired by a crew of neighbors, free of charge. Maria and Lena's pride flag flew proudly from their porch. Sarah and I sat on our deck, the structurally unsound deck that was now filled with laughing people, and watched. Gunny snored at our feet. The Graham Thomas rose, its sunset-colored blooms more vibrant than ever, nodded in the gentle breeze. It was more than just winning. It was a reclaiming. We had taken back our neighborhood, our peace, our sense of community. We had learned that the worst kind of bullies often hide behind the thinnest veneer of authority, and that the most powerful weapon against them isn't anger, but the truth, delivered without flinching. The power to define our lives, our homes, and our community didn't belong to a board or a binder full of rules. It belonged to us, and we would never give it away again. Where are you watching from? Have you ever faced a petty tyrant like Patricia? Comment your city below. Let's see how far this problem reaches. This fight was for everyone who's ever been pushed around by someone with a little power and a lot of insecurity. Share this with someone who needs the courage to fight back. And if you believe that no one is above the law, hit subscribe. Because this isn't just my story. It's a blueprint. And the next takedown, well, it might be yours.